Ever since we saw the cave drawings at the end of season 1 of From, I've been very hyped to find out the truth about this mysterious entity that was depicted on the walls. We already know that the boy in white exists, so that makes it obvious that there's other beings existing in this world apart from the monsters. But what's even crazier is there's an entity that's clearly very fascinated with Boyd specifically. And I'm saying this because we've gotten confirmation multiple times in the show that it's been watching Boyd, and this has been going on basically the entire time. One of the best ones that nobody ever talks about is this scene that happened after Boyd pulled the rod out of that girl's head, which was completely unethical. Like, bro, you have a gun, use it, instead of doing whatever the hell this is supposed to be. But anyways, this scene with Boyd and Donna shows exactly what I'm talking about. Boyd tells Donna that the name of the woman with the rod in her head was Kelly and that her boyfriend was called Brian. Now, this doesn't seem like much from an outside perspective, but that completely changes once Boyd says the first person he ever saw dying while he was serving in Iraq was a guy named Brian Kelly. Now, things are getting very crazy because it can't be a coincidence that Boyd was the one who ended up killing Kelly, the girl with the rod in her head, and it can't be coincidence that those two are connected because they were dating before they ended up in Fromland. And what makes all of this so much more insane is that this happened basically immediately after Boyd came out of the dungeon where he met Martin. And that entire situation could easily have been a setup from the very beginning, because Boyd getting infected with the worms and the music box is the only reason why the cicadas came to be later on in the season. And from what we know right now, you can easily say that the entity was manipulating Boyd from the beginning before he even entered the dungeon, because it wanted to get those three people that we saw it doing some type of ritual or whatever to in the finale of season 2. And this actually brings me to something else that happened in this episode. When Sara was at the ruins, Sara says that she can hear the music box and an entity, but the others could not see any of that. But what this scene confirms is that the dungeon is existing in some other plane of existence, an alternate dimension, or it's possibly even alluding to time travel with Boyd having possibly gone back to the past. But what's most important about this scene is that Sara says that the entity needs those people to stay in the dungeon. For whatever reason, we don't know just yet. But Sara also says that the entity was laughing at Boyd because he freed it. And it laughing at Boyd is crazy to think about. It really makes you wonder how long has this manipulation been going on for. The initial perception you're gonna have from this massive revelation is that the entity was talking about when Boyd went into the dungeon and got infected by the worms. Martin's always been someone really suspicious. A lot of the things this old man does simply don't make a lot of sense, like the fact that he completely overpowered Boyd even though he hadn't eaten in like 200 years, or him throwing down the rope on the first try, which is completely impossible from that position he was standing in at that moment. It's very easy to accept him being some sort of manipulation done by a demon of some kind, likely the jellyfish on the cave drawings. What really gets me the most about the entity laughing at Boyd is that it says Boyd freed it. And this statement is really insane in a lot of ways, because it's not exactly clear when Boyd actually freed this entity. Apart from the possibility of it happening when he got infected by the worms, there's also another really good scene that may be when it happened. The bottle trees and who exactly has been putting them up all over Fromland and for how long they've been doing that is a very significant mystery, especially once we consider that when Boyd opened up that bottle, the words 1864 were written on the letter. Lots of people have made the connection that the mythology of bottle trees in the real world has the purpose of doing this to trap evil spirits. It definitely opens up the possibility that this entity was actually freed when Boyd opened the bottle from the tree rather than when he was in the dungeon with Martin. And the fact that we've seen Jade having a vision that could have taken place around the Civil War is absolutely insane because it matches up with the letter having the year 1864 written on it, which could easily have been showing that someone somehow managed to trap that entity in that bottle, and also means that the other bottles would be containing other monsters, possibly worse than even the monsters we've seen so far. The year 1864 is also written on the lighthouse that Tabitha saw when she had a vision way back in season 1. It's very fascinating how Boyd and Sarah's tent ended up getting dragged that same day that Boyd opened that bottle. So you can easily make an argument one way or the other that Boyd actually freed that demon the day he opened the bottle. But that's not even all. There's another scene we can look at as another possible time that Boyd freed this entity that was talking to Sarah. Boyd finding the talisman. Now, this might come as a surprise, but I want you to think about the context of this entire situation and how everything ended up unfolding after it happened and even before it happened. The most mysterious thing about Boyd finding the talismans is questioning why all of the talismans were placed in this stone hut to begin with. We've already seen in the show that one talisman, if properly secured of course, can easily and effortlessly protect a massive building like Colony House and dozens of people, and even the clinic, which is absolutely huge and is built out of a school, is protected by one talisman, and that's enough. So why exactly did someone, possibly in the very far past, put all the talismans in this very small stone hut when one of them would be more than enough to protect it? It makes it easy to consider that using them all together makes them infinitely more powerful and possibly even strong enough to trap a very powerful and demonic entity such as the jellyfish. Something else I want you to consider when thinking about this is how did Boyd find the talismans to begin with? He was led there by the dog. This dog is definitely not normal. I've said this many times over, but this dog was alive 40 years ago in Victor's flashback, and there's actually two different dogs which we know because we saw both of them when Victor took Ethan to a faraway tree in season 1. But even if you want to say the dog or the dogs are morally good and on our side, then you'd have to say that the boy in white is evil, because we clearly see a dog barking at the boy in white after the massacre. So it seems at least this dog in particular is in opposition to the boy. But something else you need to remember is the reaction of the monsters when Boyd found the talismans. There's two ways you could look at this. The first one is obviously that the talismans created a magical barrier preventing them from entering the stone hut. The second possibility, which is far more interesting, trust me on that, is the monsters were afraid of the entity that was trapped in the stone hut through the use of the talismans. This is such an amazingly crazy possibility because think back to what happened at the RV at the end of season 2. We saw something banging underneath the RV trying to get in. The music box was playing and then boom, Abby showed up and the monsters completely stopped moving while all of this was happening. It's almost as if the monsters themselves were in fear, or maybe it's simply showing respect to this demon that appeared in the RV. It's one of the best scenes in the entire show. It's incredibly hype and definitely made me very excited to get answers as to what was actually going on in that moment. You can definitely and easily use the monsters stepping back from the stone hut when Boyd found the talismans as some sort of proof that this was where Boyd actually freed the entity rather than in the dungeon when he met Martin and got infected by the music box. I also want to point out that if this entity is their boss and their creator, you could also make an argument that they were intentionally trying to free this demon. Abby also lost her mind the night that all of this happened, and that could be seen as she was possibly being manipulated by this entity immediately after it was freed. Abby said she thought Boyd was dead and only a monster monster could survive a night in the forest. Could the entity have used Boyd's form to trick Abby into killing everyone in the town? It's possible. I actually used to think the entity could only use forms of people who are already dead, but there was an apparition of Ellis when Boyd was climbing the rope, so that doesn't seem to be the case. There's also a bunch of other smaller moments showing this entity has a very unique fascination with Boyd in particular, like Boyd seeing Abby in the spider web, which caused him to get bitten by the spiders, Catria's ghost trying to convince Boyd not to inform Kenny about Sara killing his dad, which eventually caused a massive rip in the relationship between Kenny and Boyd, and Catria's ghost trying to make Boyd give up in the clinic. And the most obvious of all was when Abby's ghost tried to get Boyd to not destroy the music box and to leave the people infected by the cicadas in the dungeon, which was absolutely insane to even try to convince him to do, because those people were screaming in pain. In the Season 3 trailer, the cowboy monster says it knows Boyd said they would never break him, which is something he said after leaving the dungeon at the end of Season 2. We know the monsters don't have telepathy because they were clearly very shocked when Boyd infected Smiley with the worms. If they could read minds, they would already know what Boyd was planning to do. Their reaction to his death makes it clear they had no idea what was going on, as well as the fact that these monsters were unable to automatically know the hiding spots of the people before talismans became a thing. So before what the cowboy says in the Season 3 trailer, there's no indication that these monsters have telepathy or that they can see everything happening in Fromland. There was no proof of that. And even now, we haven't seen Season 3, so we don't know how it knew that information. From what we know, this means it must have been the entity who told the cowboy about Boyd saying that. It's also curious that the dog was right there watching Boyd after he left the dungeon when he said those words, when he said they would never break him. But from the Brian Kelly situation, the fact that Martin knew Abby thought Fromland was a dream, there's a lot of hints that the From entity's been watching Boyd for a very, very long time. It's crazy how Boyd's journey to the worms started with him thinking Abby had sent him a message through the jukebox, and with Catria's backstory, we know at least one entity in From can broadcast its voice even to people outside the town, even to people outside of Fromland, and seduce them into coming into this land. So was the entity watching Boyd even back when he was serving in Iraq? That seems incredibly overpowered, but who knows? There's definitely many signs that the people have been chosen to come into this land. Anyways, what we know for a fact is this entity has been watching and manipulating Boyd for a very long time, and this demon definitely makes living in Fromland one heck of a nightmare. I'm still working on that video with Jade and the symbol and what I think it actually means. Jade has been seeing this thing since the very first season, so we know it's definitely going to be very relevant to what's actually going on in this place. Speaking of which, I truly despise these From monsters. Everything that they do and everything that they stand for is absolutely disgusting. So watch this video where I talk about how to kill these demons, because doing so is crucial to survival in Fromland.